Welcome to our CTV post-election analysis show. I'm James Bozajian, Mayor of Calabasas. Joining me here today is Fred Gaines, City Council member, and we're going to discuss the election results of the recent November election. Fred, why don't we start with you? General thoughts about the election?
Well, I guess we're in the bubble here because I was just as surprised as anyone that Donald Trump is going to be the next president of the United States. Just wasn't something that that you really thought was possible or that was that you really saw coming. But that was the story of the election, is that not only did we not see it here in California, where there really wasn't much of a campaign, and where, as when we get to the numbers, you'll see that he defeated, virtually 2-1, but nationally they didn't see what was there. And what was there is people want change. It's a change election. You had a Democrat in for 8 years. Normally, it would be an advantage to the Republican. The only reason we didn't think it was an advantage to the Republican is because of him and some of the things he's done and he said and so forth. But people for who life is not good, when you can't say, I'm going to be the status quo. Believe it or not, the first ever woman to get this close to be president of the United States was the status quo candidate. And she, even if you didn't like Donald Trump, he was looking in the camera and telling people, I'm going to get your job back. I'm going to make your life better. And she was basically saying, I'm going to keep doing what we're doing. And that's where Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, by small margins, went the other way. And, if you look at Hillary Clinton, if you actually look back to 2008, to even the primary this year, and then to this election, she was the status quo candidate. And she got beat to the left. She almost got beat to the left. She only got hit to the left in the primary this year by Bernie Sanders. Now she's been beat to the right because she was, just didn't give people a message of change and hope. And from a presidential candidate, people want that.
All right, well, let me tell you my thoughts. I mean, I normally enjoy election years regardless of what happens. This is the most disappointing election cycle that I've ever lived through. We're the greatest democracy in the world. We have two of the oldest and most durable and powerful political parties with a small d Democratic in the world. And my thoughts after the primary was, this is the best. I now understand what people say when they say that, I don't like my choices. I think both parties could have done better in terms of qualifications, in terms of integrity, in terms of experience. They were weak candidates. They were historically weak candidates, and majorities of voters didn't like either one. And I agree with most of your assessment. Let me throw something else that you're probably not going to agree with, but I have to say. The media treated this election like a reality TV show, and that's exactly what they got out of it. They did not treat this as a serious matter that I think they should have. They did it in the primaries, particularly on the Republican side, and they did in the general election. Another thing, and again, I don't know that you would agree with this, but I have felt for a long time in American politics that we suffer from the overwhelming bias of a left-wing news media. There are conservative news media, there are conservative outlets, but the weight of American news media opinion is so far to the left that it's now permeated every single election cycle. And when they trash the Republican candidate, I think it actually has less of an effect. This is the first election where the media collectively trashed the Republican candidate, and they might have had a legitimate point this election in pointing out the lack of experience and the temperament issues, but I think it went largely ignored because, it was like, oh, this is yet again the media attacking a Republican candidate, and people didn't take it seriously. So for what it's worth, I think that helped Trump, and like you said, he won. He did not win Clinton won the plurality of the popular vote, but Trump won the Electoral College, which is what counts. And locally, as you pointed out, Calabasas and surrounding communities, this is the worst that a Republican presidential candidate has ever done since these things have been tracked, since these cities existed. Throughout the Conejo Valley, you have not just Calabasas, where he lost by about a 2-1 margin like he did in the state, but in the cities, the more conservative city of Agoura Hills and the actual Republican cities of Hidden Hills and Westlake Village. Didn't do well at all.
Well, James, I don't necessarily disagree with you about bias in the media. I maybe overstated that's a liberal bias. Depends what channel you're watching.
Yes, it does.
and I think actually this election, we went from sort of this unbiased allegedly unbiased media to a biased media to liberal to a biased media with both sides. You can watch whatever side you want, to a new world where people are getting their news, whether it's real news or not, from all kinds of places. Most of these voters were not watching Fox or MSNBC. They were watching tweets and Facebook and all kinds of places where they're getting some news, some garbage, all kinds of things that are coming across. And it's a new world for how you get your message out nowadays. And Donald Trump got his message out.
He did. It's Fred. I look at the Los Angeles Times. It's always been a liberal newspaper. When I was growing up, I read it every day, cover to cover. It was a respectable liberal newspaper that had both points of view, but you knew where they stood. But over the years, now I consider it a left-wing rag. That's all it is, and that's all it will ever be. It could be an intellectual newspaper. It chooses not to be. And it's free publicity for any Democratic candidate or any liberal cause. That's my objection. And this time, when they trashed Trump, people just didn't listen because they're so indoctrinated and used to that kind of media. If they had been fair all along and this time they had trashed a Republican candidate, somebody might have listened to it. In any event, let's move to the Senate. Did you want to add something?
Well, the only other thing I wanted to say is, Donald Trump had talked about the election is rigged. The election is rigged. It's rigged by the Electoral College, okay?
Yes.
And the 5 times now in the history of the United States, the candidate who lost the popular vote has become president of the United States. 4 out of the 5 Republicans. The other one was John Quincy Adams. I think he was a Whig or a Tory. All right, so all Republicans. So this is a tremendous advantage for the Republicans.
I want to make your point for you.
And it was set up, the Electoral College was set up so that the slave states wouldn't be overrun by the northern states and have slavery taken away.
Well,
that was the whole purpose of doing
states.
it. So it is interesting that people are talking about this now. And do I think it'll go anywhere? I'm not sure. California is actually part of a pact of states that have agreed, if they get enough, that their electors would vote for the winner of the national popular vote. It's a way to get around changing the Constitution.
Probably not even constitutional. But look, everyone knows the rules of the game ahead of time. Clinton did not run a good campaign.
Right. But it is interesting. George W. Bush loses popular vote. Now Donald Trump. I actually don't think the way the country's set up now, a Republican can win the popular vote, at least not in their initial election.
Bush won.
In his re-election, but not in the initial election, because by the time the Democrat wins by 3 million votes in California and 2 million votes in New York, it's virtually impossible to catch up on all the other states. But it is an interesting anomaly, and Donald Trump joins Benjamin Harrison, Rutherford B. Hayes, John Quincy Adams, and George W. Bush as the 5 that did not win the popular vote.
Okay, let's turn to the U.S. Senate, where Kamala Harris faced Loretta Sanchez. Harris, the Attorney General of California, Sanchez, a congresswoman from Orange County. This is a lost opportunity at many levels. I think as you pointed this out, I'm going to give you credit for this. First open seat in California in 24 years, and really one prominent Democrat ran, and that's about it. Sanchez, obviously a second-tier candidate, and no Republican of note bothered to run at all. So in the top 2 system, you get 2 Democrats. I think Sanchez lost a tremendous opportunity in this election because she failed to unite more moderate Democrats, independents. She had all the Republicans because she was clearly the less liberal candidate than Harris. And she had Hispanic voters by a large margin, but she did not galvanize their support. She goes down to defeat. Any thoughts, Fred?
Well, it's shocking that this is that others, after waiting a quarter of a century or more for the seat to open, didn't jump in. Everyone got behind Harris, and it's interesting to show on a statewide basis this top 2. The idea being that a more moderate Democrat could pull the Republicans, pull independents, certainly did not show here at all, although a lot of it had to do with a terrible campaign by Sanchez.
Yes. Let's turn quickly to the House of Representatives, where incumbent Congressman Ted Lieu, the Democrat, easily won re-election in a district that does registration-wise favor Democrats very heavily. Turning to the California State Senate, this was the marquee race around here, because every other race we kind of knew how it was going to turn out. This one we really didn't. And it was an open Senate seat with a registration that favored the Democrats, but not tremendously so. Henry Stern, a Democrat, aide to the incumbent senator and retiring Senator Fran Pavley, and Steve Fazio, a Republican, kind of independent-minded businessman, well known in the community, faced off What happened, Fred?
Well, we all got excited about this district when they redistricted it, because the very first election in the new district, Fran Pavley was up against a Republican challenger. Now, do you remember the name? I can't remember the name.
Todd Zink.
Todd Zink. And he beat her in the primary, very close, 51-49. Then ended up losing in the general, but also by a very close margin.
More narrow than this.
Couple of points. Since then, it is settled into what you might normally expect in terms of Republican-Democrat, about a 55-45 split. One thing I wanted to mention, very interesting, almost the old-fashioned, used to go in the polling booth and vote down the line, all the Democrats. You look at we had 3 Republican-Democrat legislative races, Congress, State Senate, State Assembly. The Democrat and the Republicans, almost exactly the same vote totals. I mean, within 50 votes.
In Calabasas, yes.
Both in Calabasas for the Democrat, 4,400 votes for Lou, his opponent with 3,000 votes, the same Stern Fazio, the same DeBobny Cole. Interestingly, Donald Trump ran below that. Okay, so those Republicans for those races all got 3,000 plus votes. Donald Trump got 2,500 votes. So he was running. So those regular Republicans that are voting down the line a quarter of them couldn't mark Donald Trump's name on the ballot.
Okay. Let's turn to the California State Assembly, where Matt DeBobny, the incumbent assembly member, was easily reelected to another term. Again, this is about a 2-to-1 Democrat district, so no surprises there.
The only thing I want to say is, I think that if a non-Democrat's ever going to win any of these seats, it's not going to be a Republican. It could be an independent, and we saw that race, that last Waxman race against Bloomfield, where as an independent he came within 5-6 points.
Correct.
A guy like Steve Fazio against Stern, if he didn't have the R by his name and was an independent instead, you got to figure out how to get past the primary as an independent. But if he made it in there, I think it could have been a closer race.
Let's take a look at the propositions. Proposition 54. This is a sunshine bill or a transparency bill passed overwhelmingly, requires that the legislature post notifications and publicize any changes or last-minute amendments to prevent bills from getting gutted and amended so you can't even recognize them at the last minute. Proposition 55, very interesting result here. Fred, this is a tax extension. This is a quote-unquote millionaire tax, $250,000 personal annual income or more, you have to pay an extra tax. Look at the result, though. Didn't pass in Calabasas. It passed easily in the state. Why is that, Fred?
Well, because we have a lot of people that have earnings of $250,000, which, by the way, is not $1 million.
Well, they call it a millionaire's tax.
This was also something that got a lot of people upset because this was a tax that the governor asked for this and swore this was a temporary increase till we get ourselves back, and I won't ask for more. And sure enough, the governor, just stayed out of this because he had looked in the camera and said, I won't ask for more. But the rest of the legislature said, we have no problem asking to keep this. And sure enough, everybody likes someone else to pay the taxes.
Let's turn quickly to one more. Proposition 56 is a cigarette tax. For decades, accumulation of taxes amounted to 87 cents per pack. In this one fell swoop, we're adding $2 per pack in addition to that, so it'll be $2.87, which is very high considering what a pack of cigarettes costs. Not that I'm a smoker, but I did check this before today. And it passed easily in California, but look at Calabasas, it was even higher. And I think that's because of our public awareness we've done in terms of tobacco. The only people voting against this are smokers and people who just vote against every tax increase, just not a very large segment of the electorate.
And I agree with you. I think Calabasas has a heightened awareness of smoking issues. They're going to be, you're going to see 75% of the people vote this way on any kind of tobacco-related issue.
Let's turn to Proposition 57, which involves criminal sentences and parole. This is another in a long string of recent developments in California where it allows for earlier release of inmates in state prison. Passes easily both in California and in Calabasas. Any thoughts, Fred?
Well, I think Governor Brown is popular. I think he put a lot of his weight behind this. And I think people do feel that we need to save some money in these, on these criminal justice issues. Do they understand it, when they vote yes or no down to the last detail? I'm not 100% sure they do, or that I even do. You as a prosecutor may have probably a more deeper understanding, but we followed right along with the state of California on this.
And the death penalty is an anomaly. In all of the recent legislation that has cut back, and we're turning to Proposition 62 now, which would repeal the death penalty, would have repealed the death penalty retroactively in California, we've had a relaxing of criminal statutes for years now. The death penalty has been on the ballot 10 or 15 times in the last 40 years. It has always been strengthened and never been repealed. And there's been many attempts both ways, and the voters have time and again expressed support. This is an example, in my opinion, of media bias, where not a single media outlet ever supports the death penalty or writes supportively of it. I don't think any major newspaper in California or publication supported the death penalty in this campaign, and proponents of the death penalty were outspent heavily. But the repeal failed, as it has before. And it failed in Calabasas as well. I think that's going to remain an outlier, and people are going to be supportive of it.
I also think it was hurt by the other proposition on the ballot. There are people who are against the death penalty, and then there are people who think the death penalty doesn't work. We might as well get rid of it because we don't really put anybody to death anyway. They have these appeals that go on forever that cost millions of dollars. You had the other proposition on the ballot that I think we'll get to the numbers in a minute, and people said, well, that's really what I want. I'm okay with the death penalty. I want it to be reformed and expedited. And whether or not that other proposition actually does that in an effective way, we'll see, because it did pass. But I think that helped people on the fence say, this is where I'm going to go this time.
That's a good point. Proposition 63, firearms and ammunition sales. This was a multifaceted proposition that regulated and controlled and restricted firearm ownership, use, possession, and had some registration and licensing requirements. Passes in the state solidly. This is more of a gun control state, less of a gun rights state. Calabasas, it passes almost by a 3-to-1 margin. I think there's more of an urban-rural divide in the LA metro area in particular. Your thoughts, Fred?
No, I agree with you. I think that literally you could drive west on the 101 freeway, and every mile you go, this percentage in favor of the gun control will drop. But in Calabasas, it's more of an urban view of these issues, and very strong support for these kinds of firearms and gun controls.
Proposition 64 is the legalization of marijuana. This has been on the ballot before and failed. This year, after it's been approved by other states, it passed. It was not an overwhelming margin, but it passed comfortably in the state. In Calabasas, it passed a little more comfortably. This now makes marijuana use legal with restrictions for adults 21 years and older. It's had mixed results in other states, Fred. I don't know what's going to happen here, but again, this is another relaxation of the penal code that we're seeing in California history recently. Your thoughts on this one?
Well, like I said, no smoking in Calabasas, except maybe for some marijuana. It's an interesting dichotomy, but actually what this will pose is a very interesting question for us and others on the City Council. We have so far taken a position that we have banned marijuana sales, even medical marijuana dispensaries in Calabasas. When this comes into full fruition, and it doesn't until 2018, I think we'll have to look again as to whether we want. This allows us to continue to do that.
Yes, it allows local regulation of a greater degree than, say, tobacco.
Right, but it'll be interesting to see whether what people's position is, and what some cities are doing is allowing it and adding a local tax as a revenue source. We're looking in the next couple of years, I'm sure, of having some kind of debate here in our city as to whether we want to have it and in what form and with what kind of potential revenue, if at all.
Proposition 66, we alluded to earlier, involves death penalty and procedures. It is a complex proposition, so in a nutshell, it's attempting to streamline the capital process to avoid a 20 or 30-year delay on death row. It does it in various ways. This was supported by prosecutors, law enforcement, crime victims advocate groups. Very narrowly passes, which is interesting. For such a complex proposition, they usually fail if they have so many provisions like this in it. I think the voters went through and they realized what it was and figured that they wanted to streamline the death penalty as long as we're going to have it, and hopefully that it will get rid of the eternal delays. What were your thoughts on this
Well,
one?
like I said, I think who the people who wanted this were smart to put it on with the death penalty repeal, because people had to sort of look and say, okay, look, we know this isn't working, but I don't want to repeal it, so I'm going to go vote for this other proposition, which I think in a year where the repeal wasn't on, this might not pass.
Good point. Prop 67 was a ban on single-use plastic bags. This is the only statewide referendum on the ballot. It's really confusing. The state legislature passed a ban, and the governor signed a statewide ban in 2014. At the time, a quarter to a third of the cities in the state had their own bans, but the rest did not. So this would apply statewide. Then signature gatherers gathered enough signatures to put it on the ballot for a referendum. And the question before you, which was worded kind of in an odd way, was, do you approve of what the legislature did? And so a yes vote means that there is a statewide ban. And as you can see, the state of California narrowly approved the ban. In Calabasas, which was one of the fewer cities that had its own ban in place ahead of time, it passed more comfortably. I think that's a reflection of our general environmental awareness and the fact that we had made people aware of the benefits of this through banning it ourselves.
Well, and I'm actually very proud of our city because I think we played a role in this. We and some of the other cities that had these bans showed how this can work and how it does work. You and I are down in that creek every year cleaning out the creek, and we have seen with our own eyes the difference pre-ban and post-ban of what we find in when we're doing our creek cleanup. I mean, we used to pick up hundreds of these plastic bags, and the last couple of years since we've had our ban, we see very few of them, and it does make a difference. I think we help lead the way on this. I'm very proud of that.
I do lament a statewide mandate like that a little bit. I don't generally like that, and I also don't like the 10-cent charge for the paper bags. But the ban on plastic bags, it seems to me, was the way the future is going, and I think it was appropriate. Why don't you take us through the county measures?
Well, we had interestingly, we had a number of tax measures for just about every thing you can think of: parks, transportation, community college. We had a school bond measure on the ballot, and they all passed. Although in Calabasas, while they had majorities, none of them got to the 2/3 that would have been required to pass them. So Measure A is an
LA more fiscally conservative community, I think.
So this was a parcel tax. LA County parcel tax for parks needed 2/3, got 73% in the county, only 65% in Calabasas. Still a large majority, but wouldn't have passed. Measure M, which is the sales tax, half-cent sales tax into eternity, to pay for transportation projects. 70% countywide, only 61% in Calabasas, still a majority, but not the 2/3 needed for passage. And look, the bad thing about Measure M is the trains and the subways are never coming to Calabasas. The good news is we actually do get a fair bit of money from these. And some of the projects you see in Calabasas now are park and ride, lot, our bridge that we're doing, some of our other improvements. Monies do flow to us from these measures. And then there was also Measure CC, which was the community college measure, which passed, a bond measure for our community college system. And then, but the big issue in Calabasas was
Measure F.
And the historic issue, first time we've had a referendum in the city, was Measure F. Measure F was a referendum on a city council, close divided 3-2 city council vote to approve a development project at the corner of Las Virgenes Road and Agoura Road in Calabasas. Project included 70 plus homes and a hotel. Was passed by the council after lengthy hearings for the Planning Commission and the City Council, and citizens rose up, got enough signatures to put it on the ballot, went on the ballot, and the result turns out we've now had two, in the history of the city, 25-year history, our 25th anniversary, we've had two development measures go on the ballot. This one's a referendum, the other one was an advisory vote for the, what was the?
Measure C, the Malibu Valley Inn.
The Malibu Valley Inn.
2005.
The votes,
first show.
The votes, almost exactly the same, 2-1. You put development measure on the ballot in Calabasas, and at least if you look at history, people are going to vote 2-1 no, and that's what they did here.
But then, like now, there was a tremendous difference in the precincts. Now this measure failed in every precinct, Measure F, but look at the variance you see from Calabasas Park and Greater Mulwood on the east side of town, where it failed like by it got about 40-45% of the vote. Look on the west side, it got 20-25% of the vote. it was just, you rarely see things that overwhelming. The geography is very interesting, and the differences demographically in the communities. Those communities closest to the project, those communities that disproportionately came out for the hearings and sent us correspondence, they voted by 3-1, 4-1 margins against this. I mean, and that's a general election vote where you have a very large turnout, where a majority of the people vote. I found that fascinating.
Well, 2 elections in a row where we have a very split vote.
Yes.
East-west in Calabasas, and as someone who sits in the council, I don't. You try not to think about the city east versus west. We're doing projects on both sides of the city and doing what we can. But clearly, these last 2 elections, there's a view in the voting public. There's clear differences of opinion on some of these issues, and it's something that I think that we need to be aware of, and we need to work with as we go forward. This property is still owned by a private party who wants to develop it. They're going to come forward with another development plan, and the city will have to deal with how we how we process that. Part of it was people not being happy with what the process was for.
I think that was a big part of it,
decision.
actually.
And so we want to try to improve and get that and do better with that. And then obviously whatever the ultimate decision is, people will be happy, they will not be happy, but a decision's going to be made at some point on what's going to go there.
Let me give you some final thoughts on the election. I think regardless of what happened nationally, I think a majority of the public was going to be unhappy with the result. And I don't know that I felt that in any previous election. I don't sense a great deal of optimism in the country like you normally get after an election, like a coalescing around the winner, at least the honeymoon period they call it. I think we've been very polarized. I think President Obama is largely responsible for that in conjunction with the kind of campaign that Trump ran. I think it just was very difficult to have a unified country after this. I wish him the best, but I do worry for those things. What are your thoughts?
Well, it was exacerbated by the fact of who Donald Trump was and some of the things he said and did during the campaign. I mean, whenever you have a switch like this, I remember when Ronald Reagan won, I remember when Bush became president. I mean, there's disappointment, you're worried that policies are going to change, things you care about as a Democrat are going to go away, and that's going to happen whether Marco Rubio wins or whether Donald Trump wins. But you don't see some of the real emotional reactions. A little bit because the first woman lost. My 3 daughters were crying the day after the election because they thought the woman was going to be president of the United States. But a lot of it, if you are a Hispanic family with illegal immigrants in your family, you're worried these people are going to be deported. If you're a Muslim, if you are, some people in the Jewish community and others had emotional reactions to things he had said during the campaign and real worries. Now, here we are 10 days after the election, and I hope he rises to the occasion, and I think he will. But I understand these worries and concerns, and it's a little different than a regular election in that regard.
I think any other Democrat would have soundly defeated Trump, and I think any other Republican would have soundly defeated Clinton. I think these were historically weak candidates. I hope Trump rises to the occasion. I think he will be a little bit more mature in office, but it's a gamble, and the country was ready for change, and it decided to take the gamble. It certainly is a gamble. You would agree with that. This is not a stay-the-course election.
Maybe the biggest gamble we've taken.
And let's see if it pays off for what the odds were. Fred?
James, as always, it's a pleasure. This was a barn burner, and something that I don't think either of us expected. It'll be a true test of our democracy.
I was a little closer in my projections than you were.
You were a little closer.
I missed 3 states.
But,
how many did you miss, Fred?
Well, I missed a bunch, but the 3 you missed, we all missed.
Yes,
and
I know.
It'll be a true test for our democracy to see how we do when we have this kind of a change, and we hope the checks and balances are in place that we move forward in a positive way for the entire country.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, viewers, for tuning in to our latest CTV election special. We'll be back in a couple of years with more analysis.